is Jake Birkett from the UK, who formed his indie company Great Alien Games back in 2005. And 13 years later, he has 11 games under his belt, including the RPG card game Shadowhand, and casual hits like Regency Solitaire and Spooky Bonus for PC and Mac. Let's welcome Jake.
Hello. So I'm Jake. Yeah, I'm gonna do this slide. I want to make sure I can read my notes. Yeah. So yeah, firstly, thank you very much to the organisers for putting on this event and for inviting me here. You know, it's really good and interesting to be here, to see you all. Also, for the first 30 minutes, my jokes might be kind of quite bad, but after that, they'll probably warm up. So I'm going to talk to you about why, you're spending too long making your game, which is a common problem that I see repeated over the years. Okay. So I've made 11 commercial games and worked on a couple of other ones with some other teams. Most recently, I made a game called Shadowhand, which is an RPG card game. Now, the first 9 games I made on my own, and then my wife Helen, who's at the conference with us, she came up with a game idea called Regency Solitaire, which was like Jane Austen card game. And I thought it was really good, and I knew it could make some good money on the casual market, so we made that game together. And then we made Shadowhand, which is about a highwaywoman in 1717 England, going around blasting people up, but she's a kind of goodie, really. She's a bit like Robin Hood. I'm going to talk about that game a bit later, because that game took too long to make. It's very good, but it took too long to make. So I've also made a bunch of free mini games. You know, I do game jams, and there's a thing called One Game a Month, which is a site you can sign up to, and then you try to make one game a month. You don't spend a whole month on it, just, you know, a weekend here and there doing games. And that was really good for just building up my skills and making different genres and stuff like that. I also co-founded a group called Full Indie in Vancouver, so that's an indie meetup group like your one here, and that has monthly meetups, annual conference, and does game jams. Now I run one in the UK. So before I start, I've got to click a button here, just bear with me. Aha, yes. So I'm talking about things from the point of being a full-time indie developer. So, you know, I've got a wife and 2 children and a cat. I've got a house and a car, and all these things cost a lot of money. And so I need to make sure that the games I make pay, you know, for my lifestyle. So that's kind of the point of view that I'm talking about things from. Some people, you know, are hobbyists, or maybe they've got a partner that earns a lot of money and allows them to make games, or they've got a full-time job, you know, or they've got a huge pile of cash. Some people are sitting on a huge pile of cash and can make games, and that's great, that's fine. But this is from the point of view of people trying to sort of survive as an indie, which is what I've done since 2005. And I've gathered a lot of data, and I'm going to share that data with you today. So a while ago I asked on Twitter, hopefully not standing too much in the way, over here. So I asked people on Twitter, how long have you been working on your game? And I was a bit shocked to discover that, you know, a third of them have been working on their game for 3 or more years. We just heard about one that's taken 4 years, did Wes? Yeah. 4 years or so. You know, so a lot of people are spending a long time on their games. And I asked them, do you think it's wise, the amount of time you're spending on your game? Now, the people who are spending a year or so, they said, yeah, it's fine, your game's nearly done, no worries. But the people who were spending 3 years, most of them did say, yeah, they realise it's bad, but they're kind of sort of trapped in this thing that they need to finish. Other people, though, you know, did say, yeah, you know, it's a part-time game, it's fine, there's not a lot riding on this, so it's okay. So yeah, there are exceptions to you know, spending ages on your game. So we've talked about people who've got a job and it's a side project. There are also people very well known. So maybe some of you have heard of Jonathan Blow. For example, he made a game called Braid years ago for the Xbox. and then he spent 7 years making The Witness, something like that. Now, I wouldn't normally advise people to spend 7 years making a game, but he was super well known, and when it came out, it did great, and he was like, oh, that's good. And there are other games that do this, 10-year-old platform games and things like that can do that. But this is not a strategy you can rely on, okay? Even if you are well known, because there are some well-known developers that make a sequel and it bombs, and this can happen as well. So what about if your project is fully funded? Maybe you've got a publisher or an investor. That's great. You can spend longer on the game because you're not going to go broke. You still might want to finish it quicker though. And what about if you were making, this is a triple-I game. I don't know if any of you have heard that term. It's like AAA games, but for indies. So they're expensive indie games made by quite a big studio. And they're the sort of game that have got a lot of marketing behind them, good budget, and they're going to probably just do well anyway because of the type of game they are and the studio they're coming out of. So that's an exception. And then there's genres. Guess which genres take a long time to make? RPGs take a long time to make, and we made one. ResRock was one. So simulations take a long time to make. So some games, you need to spend longer making them. But maybe you should ask yourself, is this the right genre for me? If you're trying to survive, should you be picking a genre that's going to take you years to finish? Maybe not. So this is the main point of my talk, really. The longer you spend making a game, the less money you earn per hour, okay? There are other things you should strategize for within your business or your lifestyle, but this is pretty important to me, money, because I need it to survive. Now, the longer you take, obviously, the less money you're going to earn per hour. But we have heard about these 10-year-long platform games, Owlboy or Iconoclast, stuff like that. They come out after 10 years and seem to make the developer millions. Okay, great, but that is also spread out over 10 years worth of time. So, that's not so good. So let's look at an example. If your game grossed $100,000 on Steam, now, to some of you that might seem like a lot, to others maybe not, depending on the size of your studio. That's actually quite good, by the way, and I'm going to explain later why that's good. Steam and sales taxes and refunds eat up about 35% of that money, so you end up with $65,000. Then let's say you've paid artists and musicians another 35 and done some marketing. These are just figures. You could pay a lot more, a lot less. You end up with 30,000 net profit. So that's all you've got. So if you spent a year on that game, that works out at about $14 an hour, which is kind of okay. A lot depends on where you live, what your lifestyle's like, what your overheads are, and so on. But if you spend 2 years on that game, that's $7 an hour. Now in the UK, the minimum wage is in pounds, but it's about $10 an hour. So, if you're making a game and trying to run a business, you want to try and be, profitable at the end of the day. The other thing I talked about, I'll mention a talk I did at GDC a couple of years ago. I'll give you a link later on. Is that games have a long tail. So it's not just the first year of sales. You sell games for 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, some of my games have been selling, and it will keep making money, and that will keep pushing up the dollars per hour. But you have to be very patient for that money to come in. And if you've gone bust before that money's arrived, then it doesn't matter. So just a reminder, $100,000 is actually really good for a game. To be honest, only games which are lucky or promoted or really, really good, will actually do that. Your game on Steam or mobile, whatever you're on, could earn 10 times less or 100 times less. And then your hourly rate is, like 14 cents an hour. And then you've got a real problem. Also, the 100K won't all arrive at launch. What typically happens is, you'll get a big spike at launch, maybe about $20,000, and then the $80,000 will arrive in the rest of the year. So if you've built up debts making your game, or you need some money urgently, you're only going to get a small amount on launch. Launches are getting smaller on Steam now, and it's all about the spikes from the sales over time. So you can't rely on a big amount of money when your game launches. So I just want to go back through the mist of time. In 2004, I was making business software, and I was making in my spare time this game, Iron Fist. It was a multiple scrolling game, kung fu platform game. Nothing to do with the Marvel Iron Fist, I just called it that. And this is all my programmer sort of art and stuff. But I was enjoying it so much, I quit my job to go indie. And I didn't do that very sensibly. I hadn't saved up any money. I just thought, yeah, I'm going to make games. This game's going to be awesome. I know what I'm doing. This is going to be great. But that wasn't true. You can find out more about this in another talk. It took about 18 months before I earned any money at all. 18 months, okay? So I should have saved up probably 2 years worth of money, but I had zero. Okay, so this game, I was working on this full-time, and I realized it was going to take too long to finish. People think platform games are quick and easy. They're not. There's a lot to go into a platform game. The mechanics, all the sort of extra bits and bobs, the polish. So around that time I said, okay, I'm going to actually ditch this game. And I decided to make a bunch of small practice games. So this one was a kind of a Tetris rip-off, and I made a bunch of games that I finished. So you could play them from beginning to end, and they were good enough to put on the internet for free, and just go through the whole process of making a game and getting it out there. And that taught me a lot. And then around that time I saw Bejeweled. Everybody heard of Bejeweled? You know what Bejeweled is? Yeah, or Candy Crush or whatever. So I saw that game and I thought I could make a game like this and change the theme. And I actually liked it. I know some people hate it, but I like it. And I made a whole bunch of match 3s. This was my first game with a Christmas theme. And it did terribly. It's earned about $2,000 over 11 years. So, not very good. My second game didn't do much better, actually, but my third one was okay. There was also a decent market for match 3 games back then. So, I mean, that's a super important thing. Does your game have a market? There's quite a lot of blog posts you see online if you're on Twitter and stuff these days about people that made nice-looking arty games with some kind of nice story and whatever, you know, but nobody wants to buy them, and then they flop. And so you have to have a market for your game. Let's have a look. So I've got a little quiz for you here. Which of these games earn the most money? So Shadowhand is our RPG card game, released on Steam, $15. It got mentioned in lots of press. You know, we had streamers playing it. It had publisher support. So Cliff Harris from Positech Games published the game. So, you know, that's our sort of big game. Regency Solitaire before that was a $10 casual game, launched on Big Fish Games, iWin and Real casual download portals, and on Steam. And that got Game of the Year awards from places like Rock, Paper, Shotgun, Card Game of the Year, I should say, not Total Game of the Year, just Card Game, but that's still pretty good. And then finally, Spooky Bonus, which is a match 3 game with a Halloween theme we launched. So of those, you know, which you think earn the most? Well, it was actually Spooky Bonus, my 2013 game. This is it, a match 3 game, you know, skulls, eyeballs, all that kind of stuff. That game has actually earned me about $400 an hour, which is pretty good, I think. And I'll explain a bit more about why. So it took me 3 months to make, okay? So that's because I'd made a bunch of match 3 games before, and I was able to use my engine again, change the theme, the mechanics, add in some new code and so on. So it didn't take long to make. This was really important. Also, it resonated with the audience. So I said there needs to be a market. When I lived in Vancouver, Canada, I discovered that North Americans are crazy about Halloween. Yeah, even the adults dress up in Halloween costumes and do all this kind of stuff. And I realized that if we made a Halloween game, it would maybe appeal to a big audience, which it did. We also spent money on art. You know, my first game, I bought the art in from, who asked a question about assets, stock assets? Yeah, so I bought in some stock photos, stock music, little kind of shapes. And it looked bad, and nobody really bought it, right? But later on, you spend money on artwork, people equate artwork with value and with quality. So if you have a good-looking game, it's more likely to sell than a bad-looking game, right? So treat your artists kindly. Also, I did make a mobile version. I had made mobile games before, and they didn't do very well, really. They made some money, but they're a bit of a waste of time. And do you know what? It's really boring making mobile games, in my personal opinion, because you need about 20 different phones, and you've got to test all the different, configurations out, and you have to use Xcode and, iOS provisioning profiles, which is just horrible. So I don't like doing that. So I focused on just making the PC version as good as possible. We also localized it, and I knew what I was doing with localization, unlike the poor last speaker. So our game was ready for localization. So it was in Unicode and so on. And the casual portals, they localized it for me for free. So they put it in a whole load of languages for free because they know that their customers want that. It was my 7th match 3 game, so I know what I'm doing. And I launched it at a good time. All markets have this kind of curve. And 2013 was good for casual games. I think it was a good time for Steam. But I think both of those markets are in decline. Mobile's in decline. Switch is only going up. What's next? We would all love to know. So this chart here, I actually chart the amount of time it takes me to make all of my games, and I know how much money each of my games has made, and so I can show you the dollars per hour. So that's spooky bonus number 8, pretty good. Now, my first 2 games, look, they made less than $10 an hour. So imagine I quit after making those first 2 games. Yeah, I'd gone, making games is bad news, and I could have quit. I'd have missed out on all of this. Or look at number 10, that's Regency Solitaire. That's doing pretty well, but it's not doing, it took a year. So it's not doing as well as these other match 3 games. If it had taken 3 months, it might be as good as Spooky Bonus. And Shadowhand is number 11, it's just behind my head there. So at the moment, it's not made very much money per hour. Now, it's sold more than Regency on Steam. Okay, but we spent a lot of money making that game on artwork, sounds, marketing. We've got a publisher. The publisher is taking most of the money at the moment until they get their money back. That's how it works, right? So at the moment, it's not earning as much money per hour. In the long term, it will earn more, but it will never match Spooky Bonus because it took 2.5 years. So it took 10 times longer. So if you make a game that spends 10 times longer, you're earning 10 times less per hour. This is what I really want you to think about. Okay, let's have a look here. So when we look at the dollars per hour earned from my games, based on how long they are, so that's the longest game, it's pretty low, and the shorter games earned quite a lot per hour. Okay, it's not 100% conclusive, this chart, because I haven't made many long games, so I don't have many data points, but I do know other developers that have shared the same kind of data with me. And also, if you've got a chance to make a short game and roll the dice and see how well it does, you could make not much money or lots, or you can spend years making a game and roll one big dice, and then it comes up 1 or 0 or something, right? So have a think about that. So, as I say, I log my hours making games, but the reality is I don't log everything. So I almost do. But, I don't log time doing marketing or accounts or support and things like that, which are all the costs of running a business. And in between games, if I've been crunching, I might need some downtime to sort of come up with new ideas, or go to conferences like this one. I'm between games at the moment. And health things can get in the way. I've had health problems, family issues, or just enjoying life. Sometimes I like to enjoy life. It's pretty important as well. That's why I went indie, don't forget. If you want to earn money, go and work in a bank. If you want to sort of enjoy life and make games, try and run your business sensibly. So, that's the point of my talk, make games quicker. And that's why in 2018 I've got a 3-month game lined up, and I've got some 6-month games lined up. So quite a lot of short games I'm going to whiz through. But some people are concerned, does short mean bad? Does it mean a bad game with crappy quality, right? And there's a key point here, which is a lot of developers, myself included, waste too much time on small details that don't matter to the customer. So what you think matters may not matter at all to the customer. Okay, and you can waste months and years on things that really aren't that important. So I'm trying to sort of figure out what things matter to the customers and only do those. Okay, so that then it still appears to be good quality, because it is. You haven't wasted time on details. So let's have a look. So I talked about Shadowhand earlier. I mean, it's 15, 16 hours of gameplay. It's got 140 collectible cards, 22 chapters, 17,000 words. You know, there's a lot. There's 150 levels. You know, there's a lot of stuff in there. It's a great game. It's good value, and you should all buy it now. But you know, we spent 2.5 years on that, and that was even hiring third parties to do the art and sound. So this is just Helen and I coding the game, designing the game, making the levels and so on. But what if we made it 8 hours long instead, and we finished it in maybe a year or a year and a half? Then it would have done a lot better, and we could have said, do we do another one? Or done some DLC for the game instead. So, you know, there are lots of ways we could have potentially made that game shorter. The problem is also, if you make a long linear-based story game, and you're spending, you know, you've worked out the story, you've worked out the design, you know how it's all going to go, you kind of get stuck in a rut making that game. And there are other types of games which you can do differently, which I'll talk about in a bit. So, as I've got older, my kids are growing up, you know, I've had a parent pass away and stuff like this, and I've come to realize that wasting time, okay, is not a good thing, okay? So, you know, I spend a lot of time with the artwork the artist sent me. I'd spend time changing this pixel or altering this tiny thing that no one's ever going to notice. Or who refactors their code? Who likes refactoring code? I do, you know, you fiddle around with your code, and code looks really great now, yeah. How many of your customers see that refactored code? Nobody! You know, and you've wasted hours and days on that. So, and you could have spent that time with your family, or going for a walk, or playing a game, or doing something nice, right? Or making another game and making more money, if that's what you want to do. So, don't waste time. Especially you youngsters, you don't realise. Don't waste time. Okay. So I want to talk about a sort of related topic. Some of you are making games on Steam, but this is also probably applies to other platforms, even worse than Steam. I asked people how much money did their game make on Steam in the first week, and then how much it made in the first year. And this is so that we could predict how much Shadowhand was going to make in the first year. And the results are interesting because they fall between 2 times and 10 times, mostly. One person had a crazy game that was like 50 times, but it was a very unusual situation. That's gone tiny. That's because it's Open Office, not PowerPoint, official Microsoft software. You should have had that. That's supposed to be much bigger. Okay. So, my example is really that if you had a game that on Steam made $10,000 in the first week, it would make either between 20 and 100 in the first year. And that is based on a huge amount of data that I've collected. Now, that's still quite a big range, because it might make 20 and you might go bust, or 100 and you might buy a new car, you know, but it's not 1,000, it's not making 1 million in the first year, right? So it's relatively useful. And what I did is I looked at that, and the middle is 5 times, right? So I actually was more conservative and said, if Shadowhand only makes 3 times what it did in the first week, now I know what I'm getting in a year, and I can plan ahead. And what it really did is it made me go, oh my God, I need to earn some money quickly. And this is where I decided to make some short games and talk to publishers and funders and all this kind of stuff. But, you know, be conservative in your planning. Don't be too optimistic, okay? Somebody last night, Maris, he's not here, he's probably still recovering. He called me the pessimistic indie. I said, no, I'm realistic. There's a difference, right? So various things can affect the launch. You know, you can have, what's 5 minutes left? Oh, He's on the ball. I used to be in Toastmasters in the UK, in Canada, and when your time is nearly up, they've got a traffic light system. They put an orange light up, and then they hold a red light up when you're at the end, and then they clap you off the stage even if you're still talking. So I don't want any of that. But there are many factors that can affect, you know, how well your game does after launch. Sometimes you can have a great launch and the rest of the year is very poor, okay? Or you can have a poor launch, but you can do many things to improve it. Put it in sales, put it in bundles and so on. I mean, there are other ways you can make money as well, not just from Steam. In the UK, we're lucky enough that there's a grant. We got a grant for helping with Regency Solitaire, so we actually got given free money by the government. Can you imagine that? That's pretty good, and there's such a thing in Canada. If there isn't one here, one of you should probably petition your government to try and get grants or tax relief for Latvian game developers. I think you should go for that, because it has worked in the UK. So we also got tax relief for our games, 20% back for everything we spend. Can you imagine that? That's pretty good. You can also get investment or work with a publisher. Yes, there are evil publishers, but there are some good ones. The one we worked with is pretty good. You can put your game in a humble bundle. I wouldn't bother with the smaller bundles. They're just a waste of time, really, and everybody just sells your keys on some crappy site like G2A. And you can do ports, but as I said, I don't really like ports. I prefer just making a new PC game. So the average, there's a chap called Mike Rose, and he said the average good game makes about $12,000 on Steam. And when you apply my formula, that means about $30,000 a year gross. So remember earlier the $100,000 example, that was optimistic. Okay, this is what he says for a good game. Now we don't know what he views as a good game, but it's worth bearing in mind. It doesn't seem like much to me. If you spent a year on that game, it would be $9 an hour if you did all the art and sound yourself. But if you hired someone, even less. So you can reduce your time, this is the key points really, by reusing your engine. So once you've made one game, a lot of devs want to make a new game. You don't have to do that. You can just make another one that's better than the previous one. Adding some new features, change the theme and so on. Don't make a 3D game. 3D artwork takes a long time to prepare. So be careful with 3D artwork. 2D is a lot easier to do. I hear this from developers all the time. Get help from experts, don't do it all yourself. You can pay people, and it's way cheaper to pay someone than try to do it all yourself. Even hiring an accountant, yeah? Or a legal team, unless it's like the last speaker's legal team. They didn't seem to do a good job. Keep a polish list. So make a list of your to-do, and your polish items are things which you're not putting in now, but which you know, you would like to add in. But just launch the game, and then see what customers tell you they want. And then there'll probably be only 10% or 5% of your polish list. And you've saved loads of time because you didn't add it in without knowing. And be aware when you're wasting time, okay? I talked about making a type of game, there's a thing called an inverted pyramid, where you make a minimum viable product, which is a very small game which can be released now. Or you can add another layer on and make it better. And then you can release that, or add another layer on, and each layer the game gets bigger and more complex. And finally, when you run out of money or you think it's ready, you can release it. And that's a safer way to make games. And monitor your productivity. There's zillions of tips out there about getting better at working. So really, that's my conclusion. Be realistic, okay? Try to make games quicker, and be realistic about how much money they will make. So also, I want to be clear with you, this talk took a lot longer to make than I was expecting. So I spent too long making this talk, so I've still got some learning to do. And remember that I'm a full-time indie, so this might not apply to you, but it definitely applies to me. So please be realistic. Don't fall into the trap of making a giant piece of art that earns you nothing but disappointment. Okay? If you want to keep making games full-time, you need to be serious about this. And that's my GDC talk from 2016. If you're interested about my career, all the choices I've made, and so on, it's quite popular. And now you've seen this one, so good. That's it. Do we have time for questions, or am I out? Oh, we do. Okay. So questions.
Hi, I actually enjoyed your GDC talk. I've seen it before. And my question to you is, how do you go about maintaining the games? You said that there's going to be about 10 years probably the game could earn you money. And how you do maintain all of them at once?
So how do I maintain all of them at once? For quite a long time I maintained my older games, but only just only small updates, because they were pretty okay to launch with, not really many bugs, and I wasn't adding in new features. So, but I did do localization to some of them after they launched. So you can do localization before launch, but if the game flops, you've wasted loads of time and money, so it might be best to put the game out first and then localize afterwards. But there's a certain point where a game becomes too old or the market changes where it's not worth maintaining anymore, and then you just focus on new games. So I'm only just focusing on my most recent games at the moment. And I do try not to have too many builds, especially when you establish some distributors are very poor, maybe like Twitch, you know, then just don't bother to maintain for the sites which are bad. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. I get your point from the business perspective, and I think it makes a lot of sense. But you know, as you looking from the creative side, sometimes you want to implement maybe different ideas, something more complex. Should we just forget about it as a small developers, or because those take 6, 9 months, 12 months probably? Would you do another Shadowhand right now if you knew that it would take that much time? Simply because I assume it just gives a bit more enjoyment compared to smaller projects.
So what about making newer projects instead of reusing your engine? Okay, you assume Shadowhand gave more enjoyment because it was different, and it did at first, but because it's so long, after a while, it feels like, you know, walking forever. So it can be bad having a long project like that. What I do sometimes that helps is I do these game jams and things, right? So then I get to explore a new concept, a new way of coding, and game jams allow me to stretch that sort of muscle in a different way where I still keep my commercial business running meanwhile. It's always a balance, okay? If you've got, when I was in Canada, I knew someone whose overheads were 1/4 of mine. So he could do loads more things than I could. You know, I never had much runway because my overheads for my family are quite high. So I always had to make business decisions first. But I still made games that I enjoyed making, and I still learned from them. You don't have to just make a free-to-play sort of game that you might hate. Some people like it, and that's fine. You can make something you like that is also sensible for the market, and that's what I do. Any more? One at the back.
Anyone else? All right.
You have to run. You have to run. Come on.
I'm not trying that.
Okay, Jake, good to see you. Following you actually for like 13 years now, in the early days of indie games.
Oh yeah.
And it's been a while. So just a question that might be relevant for the audience. You've mentioned that you have started to develop the technology and the engine back in the days, back in 2005. We didn't have Unity, we didn't have many tools back then, so we had to develop everything from scratch. So now, like, do you kind of envy everyone in the room that they could use Unity? Would you make a new game based on Unity, or would you recommend building your own text for that and kind of waste time? To your point, like, maybe you could talk about that.
Okay, that's a good question. So would I use Unity for a new game, or would I build a new engine or whatever? So firstly, I do have an engine that still works, though I believe it might stop working on Mac soon because they are getting rid of 32-bit apps on Mac and only having 64-bit apps. So that's going to cause a problem. So I will use it for a while because it still works and I've still got a game engine in it. So there's still money to be mined there. So I'm going to mine that when I can. I feel like I should learn Unity. I've used it for game jams properly. I feel like an old man who can't operate a video recorder, you know, and I'm like, oh, I've got to learn Unity. But it probably would be sensible, maybe. Some people do make their own from scratch in C++. Cliff Harris is a big fan of that. But I think there's a huge amount of time wasted in making your own engine. It's a very technical exercise and a lot can go wrong. And Unity works on so many platforms, also Unreal and so on, that it's good. The only problem is you can't go down to the lower level and fix things underneath if you want to, as far as I know, and that may be the problem. But I think I will have to change sometime soon. I'm just ignoring that and brushing under the carpet, but yeah, I will need to. You have to adapt to stay in business. Good question.
That's kind of the point of supporting the leaders.
Come closer, please.
Okay. So it's kind of the point of supporting the 10 years. How much time do you spend actually upgrading the engine? And so do you think it's actually time wasted? So earlier.
So is it time wasted upgrading my engine? I only upgrade my engine with each game that I make. So if I add in a new feature for the game that can be used again, I put it in the engine. So I don't really need to do any other updates to it, just new stuff really as I go along, and that's fine. If you make your own engine, one common mistake is making a huge engine with loads and loads of features, and then you make a game and only ever use a tiny part of the engine. You should only put things in your engine that you're using in your current game, and you upgrade it like that.
Right.
How do you pick which games next?
How do I think which game's next? I've got a big list of potential ideas. It's huge actually. It's like pages and pages long. And I look at what I would like to make, what's technically possible for my engine and my skills, and what the market is supporting at the moment. So there are trends, like roguelikes were hot, but now everybody's made roguelikes, so maybe that's a bad idea. Even though I want to make one, it's a bad idea. Markets decline. So it's what I'd like to make, the markets, and what's technically possible. You have to combine all of three of those. That's what I do personally. And some inspiration. I also talk to my ideas, talk to other developers about my ideas, and then see if they think they're good or bad or whatever. And that can be useful, but developers aren't customers. Remember that. All these indie game awards, a lot of them give awards to games which don't sell very well. And you have to think about that as well. So what developers like is not necessarily what customers like. So do your research.
Yeah, thanks very much. This is my first game conference, so really enjoying it. So my question is a combination of the time thing and also what's coming next. And so what's going through my mind is that there seems to be, over time, blurring lines between, if you like, traditional business and social business, entrepreneurship and social entrepreneurship. Do you see something similar happening with, leisure games and applied games, for example, and whether, for example, this EU project, realising an applied gaming ecosystem, producing assets to hopefully make it faster and easier and cheaper for people to, make those kind of games?
Okay, so I'm not an expert in the area. You should probably do a talk about it. I have seen those sort of things coming along. I spoke to a guy at GDC who's making software for children who have behavioural difficulties. And he's discovered that if he monitors their heart rate, when a game gets more difficult, it actually reduces their heart rate because they actually start to focus more and pay attention to the game. So this is teaching them that when they start to get overworked with things, they can control their heart rate. So that's one example, I guess. Not necessarily social, sort of medical, but there are these things happening, and I think, yeah, we'll see more of them. But I'm afraid I'm not an expert in that, so I found that interesting.
All right, we have time for one more question, right?
Okay, thanks for the talk. I really enjoyed your GDC talk, by the way. So in Latvia, in Latvian game dev community, we have this long-running argument about whether or not you should make your own engine or not. If you should just make a simple game with Unity, or you should spend some time making an engine. And some people, there's a lot of arguments for both sides here. And I was wondering, what's your opinion of that, since you made your own engine and worked with that for years? So, okay.
So, a bit like Pavel's question, so should you make your own engine or not? If I was to start now, I would probably use Unity, actually. I like making my own engine. I'm a programmer and I love all that stuff. But from a business point of view, I don't think it's very sensible because you can waste too long. But if you're very, very good and your engine does something unique, it might make your game stand out from asset flip Unity games, right? So that's the thing, your game has to stand out. And if you just make an asset flip Unity game, you haven't done a very good business decision either, right? So, but I would probably use a tool now. I use experts for other things, artists, musicians, sound, legal, accounting. And a good engine is like using an expert programmer who's made that for you, and now you just do the game design. Yeah, so that is my opinion. It's a tricky one because I've made my own engine and it's good. So be careful though, not to waste too much time making your own engine.
Thank you, Jake.